Hello, this is Ms. Shari, and I'm going to do a series of book readings for you. So today we are going to read Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There by Lewis Carroll. And this is the junior classic edition. And okay, so the author is Lewis Carroll. What's really interesting about this story is that originally it was told on picnics to two little girls, where the author, he was a professor at Cambridge or Oxford, I don't remember which one, but he would go on picnics with his friends, and they would want to be entertained, and so then he started making up this story, and eventually he wrote it down. Isn't that cool? So I'm going to show you the illustrations also. So let me fix some of this real quick. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to use a series of readings, so a chapter or two at a time, and then you can look forward to them. So that'll be fun. Okay. So first, let's talk about the characters. I'll show you. Okay. So the characters. First, we have Alice, who is a curious young girl who finds herself on the other side of a mirror in Looking Glass land. Then we also have Black Kitten, a naughty little kitten who seems to be a part of Alice's strange adventures. And the Red Queen, a royal chess piece with plenty of advice for Alice. We also have the Red King, a royal chess piece fond of napping. We also have the White Queen, a royal chess piece who tends to be a bit backward and untidy. We also have the White King, a royal chess piece who writes in a large notebook. Then we have Tiger Lily and Rose, two of the talking flowers in Looking Glass Land. And we have a man in white paper, a goat, a horse, and a gnat, who are fellow passengers on the train. We also have Rocking Horsefly, Snap, Dragonfly, and Bread and Butterfly, Looking Glass insects. We also have Tweedledum and Tweedledee, which are really fun names, odd men who tell Alice about the walrus and the carpenter, and then quarrel over a broken rattle. We also have Walrus and the Carpenter, two characters in a poem who eat a great many oysters. We also have Sheep, a knitting shopkeeper who takes Alice for a ride in a rowboat. And we have Humpty Dumpty, a large egghead who explains the Jabberwocky poem to Alice, and then he has a fall. We also have the Lion and the Unicorn. They fight for the crown and get drummed out of town. We also have Hada, the king's messenger who enjoys tea. And we have Heya, the king's other messenger. And we have the White Knight, a kind old knight who is very inventive but tends to fall off his horse. Okay, so let's get started. Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. Also known as Alice in Wonderland. Okay, so chapter 1, Looking Glass Home. One thing was certain. The White Kitten had nothing to do with it. It was all the Black Kitten's fault. The White Kitten had been having its face washed by its mother, Dinah, for the last 15 minutes. So you see that it couldn't have caused the mischief. But the Black Kitten had her bath earlier that afternoon, and so, while Alice was curled up in the corner of the great armchair, half asleep, it played with the ball of yarn that Alice had been trying to wind up. Ugh. And now the yarn was spread over the hearth rug in knots and tangles, and with the kitten running after its own tail in the middle. "Oh, you naughty, naughty little thing," cried Alice as she reached down, scooped up the kitten and tangled yarn, and scrambled back into the armchair. She began winding up the ball again, chatting away, sometimes to the kitten and sometimes to herself. The kitten sat on her knee, pretending to watch the winding, and now and then it put out one paw and gently touched the ball as if it would be glad to help. "I was so angry, Kitty," Alice said. "When I saw the mischief you had done, I was ready to open the window and put you into the snow. And you would have deserved it, you naughty little kitten. What have you got to say for yourself?" The kitten had nothing to say. So Alice went on. "Kitty, can you play chess? Because when we were playing just now, you watched as if you understood everything I was doing. And when I said, 'check,' you purred. Let's pretend that you're the Red Queen, Kitty. I think if you sat up and folded your arms, you'd look exactly like her." Alice got the Red Queen off the table and set it before the kitten. But the kitten would not fold its arms, so Alice held Kitten up in front of the looking glass. The very first thing she did was to look to see if there was a fire in the fireplace, and she was pleased to find that there was one blazing away as brightly as the one she had left behind. Then she began looking about. Everything seemed to be the same in the room as she had left it. There were very curious differences. The pictures on the wall next to the fire seemed to be alive, and the clock on the mantel had the face of a little old man, and it grinned at her. They don't keep this room tidy, Alice thought to herself as she noticed several of the chessmen down in the fireplace among the cinders. As she looked closer, she was suddenly surprised. The chessmen were walking about, 2 and 2. She got down on her hands and knees to get a better look. Here are the Red Queen and the Red King, Alice whispered, for fear of frightening them. And there are the White King and the White Queen sitting on the edge of the shovel. And here are 2 castles walking arm in arm. I don't think they can hear me, she went on as she moved even closer, and I'm sure they can't see me. I felt invisible somehow. Something began squeaking on the table behind Alice, and she turned just in time to see one of the white pawns roll over and begin kicking. She watched it with great curiosity to see what would happen next. It's my child, the White Queen cried out as she rushed past the King so quickly that she knocked him over into the cinders. My precious Lily, my regal child, and she began scrambling wildly up the side of the fireplace fender. Regal fiddlesticks, said the King, rubbing his nose, which had been hurt by the fall. He had a right to be a little annoyed by the Queen, for now he was covered with ash from head to foot. Alice was anxious to help. So, as the poor little Lily was having a screaming fit, Alice quickly picked up the Queen and set her on the table by the side of her noisy little daughter. The Queen gasped and sat down. The quick journey through the air had taken away her breath. For a minute or two, she could do nothing but hug the little Lily in silence. As soon as she had recovered that breath a little, she called out to the White King, who was sitting among the ashes, "Beware of that volcano." "What volcano?" said the King, looking up anxiously into the fire, as if he thought that was the most likely place to find one. "It blew me up," panted the Queen, who was still a little out of breath. "Be careful and come up the regular way. Don't get blown up." Alice watched the White King as he slowly struggled up the fireplace fender. At last she said, "Why, you'll take hours and hours to get to the table at that rate. I better help you, hadn't I?" So Alice picked him up very gently and lifted him across very slowly so that she wouldn't take his breath away. But before she put him on the table, she thought she might as well dust him off a little, since he was covered with ashes. The King was far too shocked to cry out, but his eyes and his mouth grew larger and larger and rounder, until Alice's hand shook so much with laughing that she nearly let him drop upon the floor. "Oh, please don't make such faces," she cried out, though he couldn't hear her. "You make me laugh so hard, and close your mouth. The ashes will get into it. There now, you're tidy enough," and she set him on the table near the Queen. The King immediately fell flat on his back and lay perfectly still. Alice was a little alarmed at what she had done and went around the room to see if she could find any water to throw on him. But all she could find was a bottle of ink, and when she got back with it, she found he had recovered, and he and the Queen were talking together in a whisper, so low that Alice could hardly hear what they said. The King was saying, "I assure you, my dear, I turn cold to the very ends of my whiskers." To which the Queen replied, "You haven't got any whiskers." The horror of that moment, the King went on, I shall never forget. "You will, though," said the Queen, "if you don't make a note of it." So the King took out a large notebook out of his pocket and began writing. There was a book lying near Alice on the table, and while she sat watching the White King, she looked through the pages to find some part that she could read. "Where it's written in some language I don't know," she said to herself. It was like this. It's backwards. She puzzled over this for a long time, but at last a bright thought struck her. Why, It's a looking glass book. Of course. And if I hold it up to a glass, the words will all go the right way again. So she did, and this was the poem that Alice read. Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wobby. A mimsy were the borogoves, and the moon ruth outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manap's foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through and through. The vorpal blade went snicker snack, he left it dead, and with his head he went galumpeting back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O fabulous day, Callooh Callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toes, did gyre and gimble in the wabby. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the moon rath out grabe. It seems very pretty, she said, when she had finished, but it's very hard to understand. She didn't want to confess even to herself that she didn't understand any of it. But oh, thought Alice, suddenly jumping up, if I don't hurry, I will have to go back through the looking glass before I've seen what the rest of the house is like. Let's have a look at your garden first. She was out of the room in a blink and found herself sliding down the banister and then floating on through the hall. She caught hold of the doorpost and was rather glad to find herself walking again in the natural way. That's the end of chapter 1. Okay, chapter 2. The Garden of Live Flowers. This is Alice. I could see the garden much better, said Alice to herself, if I could get to the top of that hill. And here's a path that leads straight up to it. At least, no, it doesn't do that. It twists more like a corkscrew than a path. Well, this turn goes to the hill, I suppose. No, it doesn't. It goes straight back to the house. Well, then I'll try the other way. And so she did. She wandered up and down and tried turn after turn, but always came back to the house no matter which way she went. It's no use talking about it, Alice said, looking up the house as if it were arguing with her. I'm not finished yet. I know if I go into you, I'll have to go through the looking glass again, back into the old room, and that would be the end of all my adventures. So she turned her back to the house and set out once more down the path, determined to keep straight until she got to the top of the hill. For a few minutes, all went well, and just as she was saying, I really shall do it this time, the path gave a sudden twist and shook itself, and she found herself actually walking back into the door of the house. I never saw a house that kept getting in the way. Never, she cried. However, there was the hill full in sight, and there was nothing to do but start again. This time she came upon a large flower bed with a border of daisies and a willow tree growing in the middle. Oh, Tiger Lily, said Alice to an orange lily waving in the wind, I wish you could talk. We can talk, said the Tiger Lily, when there's anybody worth talking to. Alice was so surprised that she could not speak for a minute. The Tiger Lily only went on waving about, so Alice spoke again, almost in a whisper. Can all the flowers talk? As well as you can, said Tiger Lily, and a great deal louder. It isn't good manners for us to begin the conversation, said the pink rose. And I really was wondering when you'd speak. Your face has got some sense, and at least you do have the right pinkish color. I don't care about the color, said Tiger Lily. If only her petals curled up a little more, she'd be all right. How is it that you can all talk? Alice asked. I've been in many gardens before, but none of the flowers could talk. Put your hand down and feel the ground, said the Tiger Lily. Then you'll know why. Alice did so. It's very hard, she said, but I don't see what this has to do with it. In most gardens, said the tiger lily, they make the beds too soft so that the flowers are always asleep. This sounded like a good reason. I never thought of that before, Alice said. It's my opinion, and you never think at all, the rose said in a rather rude tone. Hold your tongue, cried Tiger Lily. Are there more people in the garden besides me? Alice said, ignoring the rose's last remark. There's one other flower in the garden that can move around like you, said Rose, but she's more bushy than you are. Is she like me? Alice asked eagerly. Well, she has the same shape as you, Rose said, but she's redder and her petals are shorter, I think. They're done up close, almost like a dahlia, said the tiger lily, not tumbled about like yours. But that's not her fault, or your fault, the rose added kindly. You're beginning to fade, so you can't help that your petals are getting a little untidy. Alice didn't like what they were saying about her, so she changed the subject. Does she ever come out? I'm sure you'll see her soon, said the rose. She's one of the kind that has 9 spikes. Where does she wear them? Alice asked. Why, all around her head, of course. The rose replied, I was wondering why you didn't have some too. She's coming, cried the larkspur. I hear her footstep, thump, thump, along the gravel walk. Alice looked around eagerly and found that it was the Red Queen. She's grown a good deal, she remarked. When Alice first found her in the ashes, she had been only 3 inches high, and here she was, half a head taller than Alice. It's the fresh air that does it, said the rose. Wonderfully fine air it is out here. I think I'll go and meet her, said Alice. The flowers were interesting, but she felt that it would be much nicer to have a talk with a real queen. She soon found herself face to face with the Red Queen, and inside of the hill she had been trying so hard to get to. Where do you come from? Said the Red Queen. And where are you going? Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers. Alice followed all these directions and then explained she had lost her way. I don't know what you mean by your way, said the Queen. All the ways here belong to me. But why did you come out here at all? She added in a kinder tone. Curtsy while you're thinking about what to say. It saves time. Alice wondered a little about this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen to ask about it. It's time for you to answer now, said the Queen, and said, looking at her watch. Open your mouth a little wider when you speak and always say, Your Majesty. I only wanted to see what the garden was like, Your Majesty. That's perfect, said the Queen, patting her on the head, which Alice didn't like at all. Though when you say garden, I've seen gardens that would make these look like a field. Alice didn't dare to argue the point, but went on, and I thought I'd try to find my way to the top of that hill. When you say hill, the Queen interrupted, I could show you the hills that would make you call that a hill. A hill can't be a valley, said Alice, surprised that she was arguing with her. I mean, that would be nonsense. The Red Queen shook her head. You may call it nonsense, if you like, but I've heard nonsense that would make that sound as sensible as a dictionary. Alice curtsied again, and they walked in silence until they got to the top of that little hill. For some minutes, Alice didn't speak. She looked out in all directions over the country, and what a curious country it was. There were many tiny little brooks running straight across it from side to side. The ground between was divided up into squares by little green hedges. I declare, it looks like a large chessboard, Alice said at last, quite delighted. There ought to be some chessmen moving around somewhere. And there they are. Her heart began to beat quickly with excitement. It's a great, huge game of chess that's being played. Oh, how I wish I were one of the players. I wouldn't mind being a pawn if I could join. Though, of course, I would like to be the queen most of all. She glanced rather shyly at the real queen as she said this. The queen only smiled politely and said, "That's easily done. You can be the White Queen's pawn, if you like, since Lily's too young to play. You're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the 8th square, you'll be a queen." Just at that moment, they began to run, and the queen was crying, "Faster, faster!" But Alice felt she could not go faster, though she was too out of breath to say so. The curious thing was that the trees and the other things around them never changed their places at all. No matter how fast they ran, they never seemed to pass anything. "I wonder if all the things move along with us," thought poor puzzled Alice. The queen seemed to read her mind, for she cried, "Faster! Don't try to talk." "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly there," the queen repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they skimmed through the air for a time in silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears and almost blowing her head off her head. So she thought. Then suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself sitting on the ground, breathless and giddy. The queen propped her up against a tree and said, "You may rest a little now." Alice looked around her in great surprise. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "Of course it is," said the queen. "Why wouldn't it be?" "Well, in our country," said Alice, still panting a little, "you'd get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing." "A slow sort of country," said the queen. "Now here it takes all the running you can do to stay in place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." "I'd rather not try, please," said Alice. "I'm quite content to stay here, only I am so hot and thirsty." "I know what you'd like," the queen said. She took a little box out of her pocket. "Here, have a biscuit." Alice thought it would not be good manners to say no, though it wasn't at all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it. It was very dry, and she thought she might choke down trying to swallow it down. Nothing to drink. "While you're refreshing yourself," said the queen, "I'll just take the measurements." So she took a ribbon out of her pocket and marked it in inches and began measuring the ground and sticking little pegs in here and there. "At the end of the 2 yards," the queen said, putting a peg into the ground, "I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit." "No, thank you. One is quite enough," said Alice. "Thirst quenched, I hope?" said the queen. Alice wasn't sure how to reply, but the queen didn't wait for her answer and kept on speaking. "Now, at the end of 3 yards, I shall repeat the directions, in case you forgot them. At the end of 4 yards, I shall say goodbye. And at the end of 5, I shall go." When she had finished placing all the pegs in the ground, she returned to the tree and slowly began walking back down the row. Alice was very interested in what she would do. At the 2-yard peg, she turned around and said, "A pawn can move 2 squares in its first move, you know. So you'll go very quickly through the 3rd square by railways. I should think you'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time. Well, that square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The 6th belongs to Humpty Dumpty." The queen paused. "Why have you nothing to say?" I didn't know I had to," Alice said. "You should have said. It's extremely kind of you to tell me all this. However, we'll suppose you did. The 7th square is all forest. However, one of the knights will show you the way. And in the 8th square, you shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun." Alex got up and curtsied and sat down again. As the next peg, the queen turned again and said, "Speak in French when you can't think of the English for a thing. Turn out your toes as you walk, and remember who you are." Then she walked to the next peg and said, "Goodbye," and hurried on to the last peg. How it happened, Alice never knew, but just as the Red Queen came to the last peg, she was gone, and Alice remembered that she was a pawn. and that it would soon be time for her to make her first move. End of chapter 2. End of chapter 2. Stay tuned for next time.